Welcome to the Made for Agriculture podcast with Adam, Cameron, and Emily. Today's hosts are Adam Jones and Cameron Horine.
All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the Made for Agriculture podcast. My name is Adam Jones.
Cameron Horine.
And welcome back today. We're going to title this episode The Future of Dicamba, but really what we want to talk about today are is the future of EPA labels and labeling pesticide products and how we're going to use those to manage weed control with over-the-top applications and pre-emergence applications for crops such as soybean, cotton, things like that we're applying some of these products over the top. We did want to kind of dig into label status on XtendiMax on some of our dicamba products and how we're going to manage that moving forward. So I'll try to go into just a brief history here and catch us up, and then let these guys kick around ideas on essentially how we're going to use what we currently have labels for to manage weed control for 2025. So let's back up to early 2024. The EPA did pull the complete label for XtendiMax products, and when I say XtendiMax products, I'm not singling that out. They pulled it for Ingenia and for Tavium as well. So all over the top applications of dicamba formulations were pulled for herbicide tolerant crops. So they did allow existing stocks to be used in 2024. So essentially business as usual for applying dicamba for 2024, even though we did not have a label for those products, because they allowed current label to be used for existing inventories. So that's essentially kind of caught us up a little bit to where we are. All three companies, so Bayer, BASF, Syngenta, have reapplied for a label for 2025 and beyond. There are a few differences on some of those applications that they have put in. I believe Bayer's did not include over-the-top application. Ingenia and Tavium did. And I say over the top, but it was very early, like they had cutoffs at V2 or June 12th for over the top applications of dicamba. So no matter what happens, no matter what gets approved or doesn't get approved, the label, if and when we get one moving forward, is going to look significantly different than labels that we've had in the past. We don't want to speculate or anything like that on label restrictions, labels getting through. All I will say is that the timeline on these recently has been exceptionally slow. And so I think just a logical, pragmatic approach looking into 2025 would say that we're going to struggle to have an active registered label for these products for weed control in 2025. So essentially, guys, we're looking at planting, purchasing traded seed, planting traded crops, and managing them with glyphosate and Liberty. So I guess I'll let you guys kind of jump in and start to comment on how we can still do that. I mean, I think that's still a viable option for managing weed control, but it definitely is going to take probably a different thought process than what we've had in the past. So I'll kind of let you guys kick it off from there and jump in and correct me if I missed anything kind of in the timeline catch up there of where we're at currently.
Scott, you like talking about Burndown. We can start there.
Yep, let's start there.
Well, I guess I would just, we've had a little bit of experience with this to an extent, just because I think we've all probably worked with growers that, we're using a dicamba variety, in a neighborhood that, maybe was pretty much in the list. So in some cases, those guys were already managing them without, really doing a lot of in-season. If they were just very, very deliberate about those areas they did and all that kind of thing. As far as, I think of a couple growers, I work with that are in those situations. They've probably done as good a job with pre's as anybody, just because they've had to rely on them so much and had to be so just really rely on that as their main weed control. So they were, still using talking about Burndown, Jesse, they were still using Extend. I think it was Extend in most cases for a Burndown, but, a pre was going in, and then they were just being very, that 3 weeks, 4 at the most, they were back in there with something else and just really, truly overlapping the residuals. And I always say this, and I'm good at beating dead horses, and I'm aware of that. But overlapping residuals means that is not a residual, and then some weeds break. You go in there and kill those weeds with another residual. Overlapping residuals means you never see the weeds, and that takes a lot of discipline to go out there and make another application for something that's not up. But the guys that have done that, they've had some pretty good results. The big caveat with that, obviously, you need enough rain to get those residuals working, keep them in solution. You can't have too much rain. So there's definitely a part of that we can control and a part we cannot. But for somebody that likes the beans they're planting, likes the varieties, that kind of thing, we've had success with it. But it does take a lot of, when you give up those in-season applications, you really gotta, it's all about residuals at that point.
Yeah. And I don't want to, yeah, exactly. No, that's a great point, Scott. But you did mention that even in a lot of those scenarios, they were using XtendiMax as a burn down. So,
Yes.
Just like before we had enlist traded soybeans, if we were going to use 2,4-D in a burn down, there's a difference in plant back restrictions.
Sure, there's a waiting period there, and there's a waiting period with, if you're using a dicamba that's not
XtendiMax.
Exactly. So,
Yep.
And that has happened and always has always been a part. We don't worry about, you're going out early, without other crops up, and even some of the other things we worry about, gardens and those kind of things. Sometimes it's a little more of a viable option, and it kind of depends on burn downs. It really depends on what's out there. If you're just going out and killing some winter annual grass or something like that, that's a whole different story than if you've got a lot of mare's tail that the Roundup's not going to touch. So I think there's still go ahead, somebody. I was just, it's burn downs. A lot of times are still, we scout burn downs before we go out because
Sure.
No. Product waste and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, let's start with that this fall, I guess. We're looking at a geography, probably outside of Jesse's area where we deal with a lot of minimum till or no-till soybeans. I guess step one, that's something that can be done, this fall, right, soon here, is we can use some fall residual products and more fall spraying to try to prepare for some of this. So I guess that would be one thing to think about as we get into corn harvest here, if we're rotating those crops or whatever, even if it's beans on beans. Let's put some herbicide out there this fall that's got some residual in it to minimize the need for some of those products in those burn downs. So, that's something that we can do right now.
Yep, excellent point.
Yeah, and then moving on, Jesse, I know you've done quite a bit of looking at some of these Liberty applications, and just moving forward, if somebody's going to plant an XtendFlex variety without XtendMax being labeled, essentially that's what we're planting, right? A bean that's resistant to Liberty and glyphosate. So, any tips or tricks in managing that crop, managing the weed control, other than obviously, to Scott's point, we've got to use residuals. We've got to use overlapping residuals.
Yeah. First, I'm going to hit another point on residuals. Is something we've looked at. It's just the rates of your residuals. Usually you get a rate range, and everybody talks about going to low rate because it's the cheapest. And I know there's going to be a lot of talk of let's go cheap this year. But we've looked at just from a pint to a pint and a half a dual. Like, you get 2 more weeks out of that half a pint, and it doesn't cost you that much to get it. And then we've looked at taking products and adding like a Zidua to it. So you kind of stretch out there to have, with the right conditions, you can have 5 to 6 weeks of clean fields, and fields that we know we have problems with, and we've all got them. Like it's working real good, because if you can go from having to spray it or instead of spraying 4 weeks after planting to 6 weeks after planting, you got smaller weeds, you get more time, you just get a lot of other stuff going on to help you keep clean. And then Adam's point on the Liberty, we've done a lot of stuff down here because we're having trouble with just enlist beans, with enlist working. We started out doing 2-pass Liberty, and we started out doing it like 7 days apart. And then we had some stuff that went 10 days, and we had stuff we were actually 5 days back with weather patterns and all. And what we've seen is on big pigweeds, for lack of better words, a rescue option. And even when I say rescue, a lot of these had 4 to 6 inch pigweeds we were calling rescue because we're having so much trouble killing them. We seen that at 7 days coming back after your first application, we can get 95% of them. We stretch it out to 10 days, you start losing that efficacy of what you're killing. And you get out to 2 weeks, it's basically like you never sprayed them the first time. And then even at 5 days, we were seeing really good results, just as good as 7 days at 5 days, which worried me at first, wondering, well, 5 days, maybe them pigweeds didn't recover enough to hit again. But even at 5 days, we had really good luck with cleaning up some pigweeds. And like I said, this is still technically a rescue style treatment, but that's kind of what we've seen the past 2 years.
On the second application, how much control are you usually getting?
Like from the first one, or just total?
Well, you hit them, and then you hit them that second, like a week later.
What I can tell you is usually if we just spray them once, we're lucky to get 60%. Once we hit them twice, we can stretch up there and get like 90%. Of course, everything's with it, coverage and droplet size. There's a lot to go on the backside of that, but like we're having. Well,
I know we spoke a lot about that earlier this year, and we even played around and did some trials. I guess just one thing to throw out there, and then I'll hit mute and y'all can have at me. For all the issues, Liberty's always kind of been Liberty. I mean, we've been spraying Liberty for, golly, 25 plus years. And it's always, weather conditions, we always kind of, everything's got to be right and all that kind of thing. And I think we continue to see that. But we don't, for the most part, see legit resistance. It's just one day you kill them, another day you don't, that kind of thing. I guess as we were talking about that in the summer, and I've done the same thing before, and like you said, it's usually a rescue. It's we know we've got an issue. There's no way we're going to get them the first time. So it's a planned 1-2 deal. And that's something that, Liberty's bounced around from company to company, but that's been a recommendation from whoever their folks were at any one time. I guess as I've kind of talked to some others since we were even visiting about this summer, noticed that I asked the question at one point, I wonder why we're not having the issues with Liberty and the true resistance like we do with so many of the others. And the answer, basically, at least what we were hypothesizing, that's a word, was we've always, because it's only been a 80+% herbicide in a lot of cases, we've always kind of left this kind of refuge area to where we weren't doing like hardcore selection of resistance. Does that make sense? I guess I'm almost concerned, this is going to sound silly, a little counterintuitive, but if we figure out a way to do a better job, but we're still not killing them all, are we really going to maybe screw down some resistance that we haven't seen so far? And just something maybe to be aware of. And
I'm not going to sit here and tell you we're not, but at this point in time, and not trying to be a smart aleck, but we really don't have anything else.
Oh, I know.
We're going to have to ride this to the end and hope somebody can come up with something else. I mean, your pre's not letting them come up, or Liberty, or enlisting Liberty, which I'm not seeing is any better than 2-pass Liberty.
And we don't talk about this.
So
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. Somebody else going to speak up?
Oh, I just want to ask you, Jesse, you've been looking at this. So if we're planning a Liberty application and then another application 7 days later, I'm going to assume that at that 7 day point that we're not going to be able to tell then if the weeds are going to make it or not, or if the first pass killed them. We just got to do it. Am I right there?
Yeah, 100%. Because even a couple of years ago, we were thinking about doing this, and then we'd take growers out there and show them like, hey, and then their second guess was like, man, they look awful burnt. They're like, well, I mean, it's your money. If you don't want to spray them, it's fine, but that's our recommendation. And we really didn't dig in at that point in time because it's like, okay, we were still trying this. But you get a week later, then all of a sudden you start seeing it green back up, and they're like, oh, it'll die. And then 2 weeks after that, they're like, oh, crap. And then they're sticking above the beans. And yeah, that's what we tell everybody. Don't go look. If you're going to do this, don't go look. And err on the earlier side. Just go do it. And that's hard to do. I understand. But the nice thing is I don't know what generic Liberty is going to cost this year. But it was very, very, we could spray 2 passes of Liberty cheaper than what we could spray Enlist by itself. Chemical-wise, not application.
Yeah,
Sure.
Just hearing what you're saying on the 2 passes and back to back a week later, and from a time management, I still think money better spent is we spend on those residuals. We overlap those residuals, and we may be able to get that 5 or 6 weeks, but we don't wait 5 or 6 weeks. We're coming in, 21, 28 days later, and keeping those so we don't have to rely on the Liberty being the bulk of our load.
No, 100%.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jesse did a good job of saying that. It definitely, that's still a rescue treatment, right? Even, you mentioned cost of products, and listen, I've got soybeans, and I've already looked at the markets for today, and there are some green numbers on there, so that's good. But so I feel this pain, I guess. We have, I'm not going to say anything is cheap, right? Quality products that actually work they're just probably not going to be what we would consider cheap. However, a lot of these active ingredients have trended downward over the last 18 months, and they probably are at a different price point than maybe we remember from 2 years ago. So, I mean, I know we try to preface some of the residual talk by, listen, not a bargain basement operation, right? But we're trying to raise a decent crop, because I can tell you that when you're looking at tight or negative margins, right? Tight or negative margins on a crop, taking a yield reduction because of water hemp pressure is even worse of a negative margin. So we have to find a way to use these products, even the more expensive, good residual products, to be able to raise a crop and actually make money.
So if you give me a second, I've got something from, or Shannon, you may remember from Norton's deal over your rim light, but he had a slide saying for every inch of pigweeds, I think was like right at a half a bushel of beans.
I believe it's somewhere around 0.7. That's correct.
Yeah, that's
So already,
Yep.
so
If I
just
remember
look
correct.
at that. Like so let's be reserved and take 0.7 to do half of that. You're at 0.4 bushel. You got a bunch of 4-inch pigweeds. Like, you can pay for a lot for what you're losing and still make
Absolutely.
money. So we don't want to sit here and just say, hey, this is what you got to do. We want to make sure y'all understand, like, hey, you're not just doing this to keep the population under control. You're doing this for yield also.
Absolutely. And regardless of whether you're planting an extend crop that we can or can't use extend, or enlist, traded crops, we really have to have the same plan, right? I mean, we still do I still feel like we have a little activity out of enlist, so maybe it gives you an extra option, but either way, you still need this plan to use these residuals, because nothing's bulletproof anymore. So, and these rescue treatments are going to get more and more difficult. Anything that we're spraying later in the season, I guess that's, unless you guys have some other comments, that's kind of maybe a good transition into something else I wanted to make sure that we kind of conveyed or cover a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
One more thing, Adam. I feel like
Sure.
we're going back to when we had straight roundups and we were having troubles.
Mhm.
But like, something we don't talk about very often is just either the amount of active ingredients you have in a premix, or the amount of modes of actions. And that's something we've looked at. Is you can buy generic Silventrazone, you can buy Metribuzin, you can buy a lot of these old school actives and add to your current program. Now you need to make sure your current program, like a boundary product, you don't want to add more Metribuzin to it because it's got it already in there. But adding something to that to give you multiple different modes of action that you probably haven't been using is another avenue we got to look at.
Absolutely. And you can take a branded premium over the top residual product, and like you just mentioned, for an extra couple dollars, add modes of action. That's it's a helpful thing to do. So I agree. Again, if somebody takes anything from this, just go back to the drawing board on your on your residual program, and let's see what we can come up with. So I mentioned, especially the later over the top applications. I guess I want to provide a little context as to why that is and why that becomes more difficult. So because of multiple lawsuits that most of them make it into the news, some of them don't. I think the news is a little tired of lawsuits against the EPA, but most of them recently have come. Now this latest, I guess I should say this latest dicamba deal was a clerical error type public comment period deal. However, most of these come from lawsuits based on the Endangered Species Act. So I think we ought to make sure that we understand what's going on here, right? So essentially, an environmental group will sue the EPA based on claims that there's, unlawful effects on endangered species from applying a product. A lot of these endangered species are insects. Some are other plants. There are fish. Runoff matters. So there's a lot of things at play here. But I do want to say that the later in the season a product is applied, the more risk there is, right? Because a lot of these endangered species are insects. So you think of bees, wasps, those kind of things. If we're applying products in August, that's different than us applying products in March, right? From a emergence standpoint of that species that we may or may not be affecting. So something to consider, that any of these products that we're out there doing rescue treatments with late in the season are more at risk for some of these endangered species. Logic would tell me they're more at risk for some of these endangered species applications than some of these other products are. So I also want to mention some of the runoff table and the mitigation measures tables that you will see in labels. And I've got the one from Enlist pulled up, so I'll just share it. I'll just share my screen. If you're watching on YouTube real quick, you can take a look at it. Hopefully everybody's seen this. But this is not something that's going to be unique to Enlist, right? We're going to see a table like this where it's going to give you a certain management style or management technique and a point credit system on whether or not we can make that application. So I use, again, this is the label from Enlist. I use this just as an example, but I think you're going to see this type of table because it has worked for the EPA to get things approved and keep them approved. You're going to see this type of credit system on almost everything moving forward. So don't be surprised if we get an XtendiMax label or a Tavium label or something like that, and it has something like this on there, and you have to have a certain number of points in order to be able to make an application. Don't be surprised as to why that is. I think looking forward, atrazine, some of these other things that are coming up for label registration are going to have this exact same or a close version of this credit system on making sure that we can make applications. And this is on the label. This is on every label of Enlist that there is. It explains what some of these are. This HSG that's hydrologic soil group. So think of an A or B as a porous, sandy type soil, and a C or a D is a really tight clay soil. So some of these things, just basic things like field borders, cover crops, grass waterways, some of those mitigation conservation practices are going to give you more credits. If you have no conservation practices in place and do full width tillage, there are a lot of times that you are going to struggle to have enough credits to be able to legally make an application. So I don't think that is unique to Enlist. I think that's the way that this is going to be for a lot of these products moving forward. Don't like to speculate, but like I said, this is, anything that reduces runoff from that field is going to give you more credits or more of a chance to make a legal application. So any other guys have comments on this? Like I said, this is going to be on future labels as well.
I would just say on this, it's it does take a little bit of background work going to the web soil survey and trying to figure out what farm, what type of soils you have according, or hydrologic soil groups you have according to this. It's not that terrible to figure out, but it is some extra steps. So it's probably not a bad idea to go ahead and get some practice on that. Just if this is going to be coming, just get some practice on the web soil survey to figure it out, and that way it's painless when you have to put it into practice.
Absolutely. No, that's a good point. Like I said, didn't want to show it for any other reason other than just to say that this is how EPA is mitigating some of those Endangered Species Act provisions, and this will be on labels on most of the new ones that we see coming out. So, with that, I guess we'll transition a little bit more to just kind of general thoughts from you guys as we go into this fall. We mentioned there are things that we can do now. So, I kind of came away with maybe some fall spraying, maybe taking back to the drawing board our soybean weed control system moving forward. But we're also making seed decisions right now. So let's be thinking about, what herbicide options we have with some of these traded crops, and things like that too. So just keep in mind, as we're making some of those decisions, let's not do something that's going to handcuff you, moving forward. However, as Scott mentioned, we've got folks that are using, these XtendFlex varieties, because they feel like they're a fit from their farm for their farm. And as long as it's done properly, I don't see a major issue with that. However, if you feel like you need some more flexibility, the Enlist is still labeled. So, I guess one thing, Cameron, I don't know if you kind of had this queued up or if I'm just completely blindsiding you here, but we do rep trials on all of our seed products, all of our soybean seed products. If somebody is, I guess, is there a yield difference that you guys see between traded products?
So that was one thing I was going to mention, Adam, is when XtendFlex first came out and then E3 first came out a few years ago, there was still a yield discrepancy between XtendFlex products that transitioned from the straight Xtend line to E3 line. From what we've seen today, is that gap is pretty much been filled. So to a certain degree, there's not really a yield difference from the XtendFlex line in the E3 line. The genetics on the E3 side have got better. Obviously, market share has grown from that, and so that's been a big push from the genetic suppliers of looking at that, right? The one thing that we don't know, because we haven't seen it, it's been in testing, is what do HT4s, what do those look like, and what do those genetics look like, and what's that going to bring? We've talked about it from HT4 standpoint. It's going to be bringing from a herbicide tolerance, glyphosate, glufosinate, 2,4-D, and dicamba, right? With the situation of the dicamba label today, over the top applications is not going to be rough. We're not going to have that. Obviously, depending on what registration happens, maybe we have pre-emergence or maybe up to V2, depending on however those labels fall for dicamba. But the other thing that we may have is improved genetics from that standpoint. We just haven't had a chance to see it, so we don't know where that yield advantage is going to be, if there is. But today, they're pretty much on the same level from that standpoint. So what I would say is, we're in seed selling season. The reality is, it's a matter of what you're comfortable with, what where you stand from that standpoint on is what you need to be. As mentioned, Adam, if you go the Enlist platform, you still do have that Enlist as a labeled product as a residue. But I think we've kind of touched on it today, is that in reality, other than Liberty, there's not a lot of over-the-top options except for that E3. And unless we want to go back to spraying a bunch of fields with Cobra and Resource, right? From a PPO standpoint, trying to control weeds from that side. And so in my opinion, I don't think it matters what system we go to. We have to be proactive, like we talked about here, and make sure we're using a Burndown and then following up with 2-pass residual system. It doesn't really matter if you're in Xenflex or E3. That's the program we have to, and we have to get better at that, of utilizing that and spraying. You know, I've heard agronomists say it, Brian Norton and others, spraying seeds, not weeds, right? And making sure we're working with clean fields and continuing to overlap from that standpoint. And that's the only system that we can use. And if you use that system in we can, the weather plays right and we do that, it doesn't really matter if you're on the Xenflex platform and E3 platform, you're still going to have good genetics and good yield from the beef.
No, that's exactly right. No, I appreciate you bringing that up, Cameron. We've looked at these products in the exact same field, and I agree. Our rep trials are all intermixed, right? We've got Xtenflex varieties intermixed with Enlist varieties, and we don't see a significance in yield difference between those. I mean, we see a difference in varieties, obviously, but not one platform over the other. So I don't want somebody nervous about switching to Enlist because they feel like they're going to take a yield hit. I don't think that actually exists. I'd also don't want somebody switching just because they're nervous that they can't control weeds, because I feel like you can. So as long as it's done properly. So just things to be thinking about as we're making decisions for next year. Anybody else have anything they want to comment on that?
Well, the only thing I'd add on this, we've just to a couple things. We're getting good control in some areas and at some times with Enlist as well. It's not, it's just not, it's not lights out. It's not 100%. It's back to like some of the other platforms we use where we really have to look at conditions and, weed height becomes huge, adjuvants, all of that stuff. So I guess I don't want to get too down on the Enlist trade. I mean, it gives us a lot of options. And it also gives us, options still on the Burndown side. We're not having to wait for, a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is, depending on the rate, after we burn down to plant. But it's not, it's not like Roundup when it first came out and it just kills everything. We've got to, it's just like everything else. We got to pay attention to all the little details and,
sure.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you 100%, Scott. I mean, I know in places it may not be, but I think, personally I've seen benefits from running Liberty and Enlist together versus just Liberty. I mean, it seems like there's benefit there.
Yeah.
I think you touched on.
Go ahead, Cameron. Well,
Cameron, go.
Well, Scott, I was just going to say, I think you touched on something, and Jesse also mentioned it from the generics, be able to, from the load content of some of these products. But Scott, you mentioned adjuvants. I think that's one of the things that has been potentially overlooked that we need to be more careful of, especially as we're starting to use more post-patent products. We're starting to use more generics. What is the load content of that? But also, what is the adjuvant load that's in those generics? A lot of our branded products have an adjuvant load in it already, and then we're adding adjuvants to it as well and making those products even more effective. Whereas a lot of these post-patent products, part of the reason they're cheaper is the adjuvant load that's in them is degraded. And so are we being better at utilizing the adjuvants that we have to make that? And so that has an impact on on yield as weed control as well. And so I think we have to do a better job of making sure that we're utilizing the other tools that we have from an adjuvant standpoint and utilizing that appropriately for these post-patent products that may not have as high of an adjuvant, package that's already built into that product.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just like we kind of AMS, it's cheap. We don't always think about it a lot, but the difference in running 2 pound per acre to 3 pound an acre per 4 pound an acre can make a big difference, especially when you're looking at what kind of weather we have and that. And also, I didn't mean to run down Enlist because we still have times we use it. And we've just got to where we understand is when it gets hot, we need to swap to Liberty. And even this summer, when we had them 2 weeks where we got down in the low 80s for highs, we went back to some Enlist and had some pretty good luck with it. But then when it got hot back again, we just knew, okay, it's 95 degrees. It's time to go back to our 2-pass Liberty option. So my Corteva rep will appreciate that.
No, I mean, what you're saying is just read the world around you, right? Nothing happens in a vacuum. We know that. So it's good comments.
Well, and to that, Jesse, like you just talked about, your Corteva rep. I mean, they've been great on trying to work, what they're seeing and communicating, across a large region. It's kind of, there's been a lot of communication about what seems to be working and what's not working. And like you said, it even changes throughout the summer and the conditions. Unfortunately, sometimes that stuff's, in hindsight, we figure out there was an issue at a certain period. But in some cases, like you're saying, just where, when you recognize that it's really getting hot and that kind of thing, I mean, we are learning a little more there. I think a lot of it's maybe in hindsight, it shouldn't come as a surprise to us. I mean, even in Burndown, sometimes with just 2,4-D, not picking on a list, we would struggle sometimes with, some of the control, particularly with water hemp. I noticed that years ago. I guess a lot of us probably just thought when we go from a pint to a quart, a lot of that was going to change, and I think it definitely did help, but it wasn't necessarily lights out every time. So just need to be aware of that and not put too much pressure on that platform either.
For sure. No, we're getting good communication, good support, Scott, from all of our rep staff. These guys live in the real world just like we do and understand that their products have a place and a fit in these weed control systems, but nobody has a lights out solution to where they can just kind of turn their back on everybody else and not communicate or understand what's really going on. So I think everybody's done a good job of that, working together. What else do you guys have that we need to cover kind of on this topic? I feel like we've done a good job of kind of laying out the scenario and positives and negatives and what we need to be thinking about no matter what traded products that we're purchasing for next year, and maybe some of the things ahead of us on the labeling front from the EPA. But anything else that we didn't cover that you guys feel like we should throw in there? All right, perfect. Well, hearing none, I think we're gonna call this an episode. I appreciate all of you guys being on here this morning, passing along your expertise. We do have one more episode in the queue here in a couple weeks. We want to come back and talk a little bit about SCN and how that can play a factor in soybean yield, soybean management, and what we're going to do for 2025 and beyond on that topic. So tune in a couple weeks and we'll have that episode. Hopefully everybody enjoyed today, learned a few things from it. I don't want to sound it doom and gloom by any means, but farming's not easy. Nothing happens in a vacuum, and that's sort of part of what makes it interesting, right? So appreciate Cameron, Shannon, Scott, Jesse, and Kevin. Thanks for all your all's time. Thanks for everybody's time listening this morning, and we'll see you next episode.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Made for Agriculture podcast, brought to you by MFA, your whole farm solution.